Welcome to the Sober Nation FM podcast, where we're putting recovery on the map. I'm your host, Jonathan Sylvester. This show is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Do you want to take your recovery to the next level? Do you want more support, community, and fellowship? Sobriety Engine is an incredible free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. You can get a ton of great tips, resources, and guidance to help you succeed in recovery and in life. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. Sober Nation FM is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle, all while supporting your sobriety, then you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Nation, let's hop right into today's episode. Today, I'm going to be speaking with online recovery coach and author of the Amazon best-selling book, Recovered, Mr. Jacob Jones. Thanks for coming on the show with me today, Jacob.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before we talk about your book and everything else that you're doing these days, tell us a little bit about what things were like before you got sober and how you actually found recovery.
Man, I guess I can just give like a brief overview. So before, like my road into recovery was, I think it kind of started out in around like 8th grade when I kind of realized that I was feeling like a lot of stuff that probably normal 8th graders would feel, like peer pressure, anxiety, started having trouble sleeping, and a lot of different stuff like that. Fear of not being accepted by my peers. I would think, and I don't like to generalize and say everybody feels that way, but I feel like a lot of people that are in 8th grade could relate to one of those things.
Yeah, I
so
think you're
nothing
probably
like,
right.
Yeah, so like nothing crazy out of the normal at that time. So from there, things kind of just like started to get worse and worse and worse. And I never really had anything healthy in my life to help combat those things. So it was kind of just stuff that I would sweep under the rug. I played football, and that helped a lot. So whenever I put my helmet on, that helped significantly, where I didn't have to be like that person anymore. I could kind of be a different person.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it was an interesting dynamic looking back on that, how I was utilizing sports to kind of cover up some of those underlying feelings. And then I progressed. I started playing football in college and ended up taking a medical release. And at that time, football was like my big outlet. I had like a lot of pride and ego wrapped up into playing college football. And so when that stopped, there was just like this huge void in my life. I didn't really have an identity anymore. Because like I said, I wrapped my identity up in being a college football athlete, and didn't have like a unhealthy source of dealing or coping with things. And so it kind of all started spiraling downhill. And again, just a brief overview, I started getting into opiates, started getting into benzos, and then long story short, hit a rehab. After that, tried to get sober, didn't get sober. Things got worse and worse. After that, wound up in critical coronary unit for a week, a psych ward for 3 weeks after that. And all of this was over a span of, from like my years in high school when I started dabbling to the time that I actually got sober was about a decade. And
Wow. Okay, awesome. And so tell me just what your recovery journey has been. I know that when we spoke previously and just from looking into you a bit, there's a large spiritual aspect of, going on there. And it sounds like you're pretty involved in your church and so on and so forth. But tell me what your recovery has looked like. So I'm guessing based on the title of the book, that you found a 12-step program at some point.
Correct.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. So tell me about that. I mean, just what did that, how did that all progress? How did you get introduced? Did you find a sponsor immediately? What did all that look like?
Yeah. So actually, to kind of put a cap on the story that I was telling earlier, ended up finding another rehab. It was, I'm from Alabama, and it was in Gainesville, Florida. That's where I currently live. So I come to this rehab in Gainesville, and ended up finding a sponsor while I was still in rehab. I was there for about 5 months. And so the 12-step group that I'm associated with here in Gainesville, they believe in working the steps pretty aggressively, pretty fast. So that's what I did. I jumped in. That was really, I remember having that thought of trying everything, and like the steps being the last thing. I don't know why. I talked to a lot of people, and they're like, well, I've tried this and this and this and this. Well, have you worked through the full steps, and are continuing to sponsor people, continuing to help people? And they're like, well, no, but I've tried this and this and this. And so it was funny. I remember before I was going to work the steps that I was like, well, this is like really the only thing that I haven't truly tried. So I don't even think it's going to work, but I'll give it a shot. And so that's kind of like where it started.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, man. And I've certainly had some other friends, even, and some of my brothers in recovery kind of have the same experience in that they didn't even think it was going to work. Like sometimes they just did it because they were in rehab or sober living for like an extended period. And they're like, all right, well, I'm here. Like, I'm just going to do it just to like get people off my back. And sure enough, it actually worked, which is pretty amazing. So tell me a little bit about life after getting sober. I know that you got married more recently, right?
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so tell me just what things are looking like these days, and just kind of what it's like now.
Yeah. So now life looks very different from that decade where I was in addiction, and I ended up, I've been sober now, like we were talking about, for about 3.5 years. Recently got married, which is amazing. Recently bought a house, which I never thought would be something that, was in, my deck of cards that would be a reality for me. I remember, starting off the journey in recovery, and I didn't have like any money. I remember like going to the local church that I'm a part of now and having like $2 and like tithing my $2, and that was it. So those things are all amazing. Actually, that church that I came into, I actually lead the prayer ministry there, do a lot of missions work with them. And that's actually where I met my wife, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I met her in Nicaragua. So we went on a mission trip there, and I kind of lead some of the mission stuff there. So we've been on several different mission trips to different countries, and that's been super rewarding. Like we talked about, I do some online coaching stuff. I also work at a nonprofit here in town. It's a blood bank. So that's another thing. I'm the president's executive assistant, which is pretty wild to say that, coming from the background that and to be the president's, right-hand man is pretty interesting. And it's hilarious. I actually gave her my book to read, and she read it. And she was like, wow, like you almost died. And I was like, it was pretty bad. And so it's been pretty cool to kind of like bring, the experience, strength, and hope of recovery in my workplace, in the church, all that stuff. So it's been pretty cool.
That's awesome, man. And I love hearing stories like that. And yeah, I'm with you. Like I was, broke as hell and didn't have anything good going for me. And I mean, because 100% because of recovery, I have the life I have today. Let me ask you, I mean, because you're someone that's putting yourself out there and talking about your recovery. What have some of your experiences been? And let me just say that I don't feel like everyone has to just say like to everyone they meet, hey, I'm sober, I'm this or I'm that. Um, but you're putting yourself out there. You're letting people know, like you just said, you gave your boss your book. What has been your experience just in kind of putting that out there? I mean, how is that? I think a lot of people are scared, about that. In my experience, it's all been good stuff, and people have kind of, like you said, been like, wow, that's amazing. So what has your experience been?
Yeah, so that's definitely a good question, and I really appreciate that question because living in Gainesville, I get that question more so than not, from the standpoint of people will say, "Well, where are you from?" They'll talk about Florida and this and that, and still sometimes, some part of Florida I'm not super familiar with the whole state, so they'll kind of be like, "Well, you're not from Florida," and I'll say, "No, I'm from Alabama," and eventually it comes up, "Well, what brought you to Gainesville?"
Uh,
and and so I get that all the time. Not all the time, but I get it more so than not. And so without fail, I don't know why, I just felt led to do this, but ever since I've come to Gainesville, I've always said rehab. And it's been pretty amazing, all the responses that I get from when I was working at an organic grocery store. I remember, this woman asked me that, what brought you to Gainesville? I'm sitting there handing her chicken salad over the deli counter, and I told her that, and she said, she looked at me and she started tearing up, and I was like, oh man, maybe she's like super pissed off at me. She want me touching her chicken salad, or I don't know what's going on. And so she looked at me and she said, um, I just had a son recently that passed away from a heroin overdose.
well,
And she looked at me and she said, I just want you to know that I love you and that you can do this. And actually came around, she gave me a hug, and it was super powerful, just in that split second moment, to be able to have that interaction. So to kind of follow up and answer your question, I would say most of the time that I have that response, 90% of it is people that are like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Oh my goodness, I've had somebody in my family that has gone through the same thing. And it's been super positive. The only short, small percentage of people, they're don't know how to respond to it.
yeah,
And
right. Awkward.
yeah, and it is that small percentage of people, they're like, huh. And then either go on about their business, or I haven't had anything negative. I will say that. Nobody's been like, oh my gosh, are you serious? You used to use drugs, you're a terrible person. And I think sometimes we think that will be the response. But it's been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And that does sound like that story you just shared. That's super powerful. The truth is, I mean, number one, in Florida for sure, with so many rehabs down there, it's not a secret that there's so many people down there for that.
Right.
But also, like you said, and this is part of the reason I wanted to ask you this, because I'm sure there's going to be, some people listening out there in the sober nation that are new to recovery, and they're probably thinking about that. How do I that was one of my fears. How do I approach that with jobs? How do I approach that just in everyday life, or old friends, or maybe a distant family or close family that doesn't know what's been going on? And the truth is, these days, especially with this opiate epidemic that's going on, everyone, I would say pretty much everyone knows someone that has struggled with this.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
that is just the reality. And so I think it's important to realize that while maybe you don't feel comfortable saying hey, I'm a ex drug addict, or I'm in recovery, or like you
Right.
said, rehab brought me here. It's important to keep in mind that I might be the only person in recovery that this person ever meets, right?
Yeah,
Or in
for sure.
12-step terms or AA terms, I might be the only big book that
Yeah.
somebody ever meets. So let's talk about that a little bit. I want to talk about your book, and your book is titled Recovered: How an Unsustainable Addiction Led to a Sustained Life. And I really love that title. And so I'll just give our listeners a warning here. I think we're going to be talking about a topic that within 12-step programs and maybe in recovery is, man, I think there's this big debate sometimes, right? Because
Right.
you and I spoke about this, and I'll be honest, my thinking on this has changed. Some people say recovering. I'm still
Right.
recovering. I'm a recovering addict. I'm a recovering alcoholic. And then, early on in when I was going to meetings, I would hear every now and then, not frequently, but someone introduced himself as a recovered alcoholic. And I just look at this guy, and I think this is what most people think, and this is what I thought. So this guy thinks he's cured.
Right. Exactly.
This guy thinks he's cured, you know, and
Right.
who does this guy think he is? And I'll just tell you, and I want you to kind of explain this a little bit more, but my thinking has changed on that a little bit. So, why the title of the book, and what is the book about?
Yeah. So the title of the book, Recovered, actually, it's kind of like a riff on this line in the big book that talks about the first 100 that have seemingly recovered. And it uses that word recovered from, a hopeless disease or a hopeless condition. And so that's kind of where I pulled it from. So it's pulled directly from, the 12-step text that everybody uses. This wasn't something that I kind of went went rogue on and made up myself. It was something that I pulled from the text that I used to get sober and to live this life that I'm living now. The reason why I say recovered, and I say this too, like when I introduce myself at meetings, I say recovered drug addict, because I think our words are very powerful. And I think that if I introduce myself, hey, my name is Jacob Jones, I'm a drug addict, that I'm speaking to the old person that I used to be.
Okay, that makes sense.
And everybody, I'm not telling people what to do at all, because everybody has their own. That's the best, and I'm not saying that's wrong if you do that. Definitely not saying anything like that. But that's just my personal conviction and how I feel about it. And so when I talk about being recovered, that just means that this this craving, this mindset, this hopeless, insatiable appetite to drink or to use, that I could never overcome. Through this 12-step work, and doing things like that, it's been lifted from me. So I no longer struggle on a daily basis anymore with those thoughts that I used to have. When I say recovered, that's contingent on my daily spiritual progress. It's contingent on enlarging my spiritual progress. So being recovered doesn't mean just flipping a switch and that switch can never go back. That's not really what I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to, if I continue to work the steps and continue to play out the principles in my life, like the book lays out, then I believe that I have recovered from that seemingly hopeless condition that I was in pre-recovery.
Okay, that makes sense to me, and that's really similar to how it was broken down to me. And like I said, I was someone that, um, and personally, I don't really, care how someone introduces himself. But like I said early on, when I heard, some people saying, "Hey, I'm a recovered alcoholic," while sharing in a meeting, I was just like, almost like, who does this guy think he is?
Right. It does seem like boastful or like, egotistical or something like that.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, I think it was, listening to this guy share a story at an AA club I was going to for a while, and then listening to the same guy, doing some like big book studies and stuff like that, and just hearing a few other people's explanations. Like what I started to see is exactly what you're saying, that it's not saying I'm cured, it's saying that for today, I'm as recovered as I'm gonna get,
Right.
like in terms of this hopeless state of mind that addicts and alcoholics experience, and I definitely experienced. And what someone kind of broke down to me is, he was just touching on when someone says recovering. And again, I'm not saying one way is wrong, one way is right, or anything like that. But what made sense to me was, it's just like Jonathan, if you say recovering and there's a newcomer in the room, what they might think is well, man, this guy's got 25 years, let's say, of
Right.
sobriety, and he's still recovering. Well, when does he get better?
Right.
And that kind of, so I don't introduce myself as recovered, but I understand the thinking, and I forget how many times the big book uses the word recovered. It's quite a few. So I get that. Now tell us what the book is about. Who is the book for?
Yeah. So the book is really it's kind of at the beginning is partially some of my story. So it's both for people in recovery and both for also for people that have loved ones that are in recovery. So my biggest thing with this is kind of educating people on addiction, educating people on drugs and alcohol, and also inspiring hope to people that are going through it, and also to families as well, because that's something that we often forget when we talk about recovery is the families that go through all this stuff with us, man. This like horrific roller coaster that we go on. That is, they just get like drugged along with us, through this thing, and they have that same like helplessness, and they're just sitting there like being a part of it, like literally getting drugged along with us.
Yeah.
So it's for the families and loved ones as well. So it's not it kind of starts out as just a little bit introducing myself, if you can say it this way, like qualifying myself as like the real deal drug addict for like the first chapter, and then the second chapter kind of goes into like my like terrible hospital stay. I was in the critical coronary unit for a week and went into the psych ward for 3 weeks after that. And then after that, it kind of gets into some different stuff on, like through the eyes of the family, through the eyes of somebody who's going through addiction, and then also the solution as I see it.
Okay, that's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
and you also, when we were talking about just you sharing, for instance, with, your boss or other people that you're in recovery, or why you ended up in Florida, or how you ended up in Florida, I should say.
Right.
I think it's also important to remember, because this has been my experience a lot when I talk about people that are not in recovery, and even if they don't have family members, is your story, and I'm sure it has been, Jacob, your story could be super inspirational for someone that's not in recovery, because which makes sense to me, because it's like, oh wow, if this guy that was in the hospital, literally, on death's door, you know, jails, institutions, death, like we are not,
Mm-hmm.
or close to death, like we
Yeah.
experience, then man, maybe I can get my life together,
Right.
and I think that's something. So I'm sure there's someone that's going to pick up your book, or has already, that is in a similar situation as well. So you also are an online recovery coach through
Mm-hmm.
your company, Sustained Life, and I see you work that into the title,
Yeah.
which I like there. So how did that actually start?
Um, it just started as a way to, well, I guess it all spawned from this book. So I'll just touch back a little bit on the book of, with my book, it was just something that I really felt necessary to get out there. It's like doing like a fourth and fifth step with the world. It's kind of like all my crap in this book. And it's like, okay, here, y'all read it. And if you like it, cool. If not, that's okay too.
Yeah.
And I never like intended this book to be, the cure all for addiction or some like grandiose thing. What I really wanted from this book is kind of like you were saying, like for somebody to read it and be like, man, he was that bad. Like maybe I can do that too. Like spur just like give somebody like a little glimmer of hope to where they continue to go and get themselves help, whatever that is, finding a sponsor, going through the 12 steps and stuff like that. And then so I was thinking, post 12 steps, there's a lot of stuff that I've learned after getting a sponsor and after working through the 12 steps, just like normal life stuff that like getting married, buying a house, doing well in my workplace.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that's something that's kind of out of the purview of a sponsor. And that's something that I feel like I could add value to people's lives if they wanted some more help beyond the 12 steps. Because when I wrote this book, and again was putting it out there just to kind of encourage people, I was thinking, well, maybe I can encourage them in some other way too. And by no means wanting to take people through the steps or anything like that. That's not what this service is about, because I believe that that should be done in a completely different way.
Sure.
But this is just like a kind of like something to add to your recovery, like something that will help enhance your life. And I thought that, I could have used this help, something similar to this along the way, and I got it like bits and pieces from different people. But if I could have somebody there that was like marching me through all the stuff that I needed to, it would have been super beneficial for me. So I was like, well, if I have that experience and knowledge, that's something that I could translate and help other people with. So that's kind of like where the idea spawned from.
Yeah, I really like that, man. And now, so are most of the clients you've worked with, are they really new to recovery? Have they been in recovery a little while? Is it kind of all over?
Yeah, it's a little bit of all over.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I've done something similar in the past. So let me ask you, what do you think, what with the people that have been in recovery for a little while? And I think one thing I know that we touched on earlier would be the financial part. But what do you think is missing a lot of the times with the people that have been around a little while and feel like maybe something is missing? Like what are some of the roadblocks that you see these people hitting?
Yeah. Yes, good questions.
It's my job, man.
Yeah, you're doing good at it. So like the main thing I see with people is that like common sense isn't always common practice.
Okay.
And so that's kind of like the biggest thing too of where I'm trying to go with all this stuff is keeping it simple enough to where we can continue to stack all these sustainable habits on top of each other. So that's what I find is like, going back and hitting the basics of things. That's usually where I would go, is hitting the basics of things that we know are healthy, that we need to reapply back to our lives that we're not doing currently. Whether that's taking a nightly inventory, whether that's, like if it's, we go off into different stuff like diet, exercise, doing things that, I'm just throwing this out there, like a common sense thing. Everybody knows they should eat more like leafy greens and vegetables,
Sure.
right? But then you go to the doctor and like, doctor, I have heart problems, I'm overweight and all this stuff. And he's like, why are you doing this? And you're like, well, no, I'm not doing that. And so I find the same thing like in recovery. Like a lot of times we know what we're doing, but we need somebody to kind of re-walk us through some of the steps, some of our blind spots that we have. And that just goes with general life stuff like we're talking about, or things specific to the principles of recovery.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now, let me ask you about the specifically about newcomers. And I'm just going to say newcomers that you've coached, newcomers that you've sponsored.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the Look, I think sometimes we can agree that like mistakes need to happen. Like they're part of our,
For
they're part of
sure.
our journey, right? But on the other hand, I mean, man, like especially these days, a mistake can lead, uh, you know, to a deadly end, essentially. So,
Right.
what are some of the biggest mistakes or missteps that you see newcomers making? Do you think?
One of the biggest mistakes would be hopping into a relationship prematurely. Because I remember saying this too. I remember being still in rehab, saying if I go out from here and anything takes me down besides the drugs, it would be a woman.
Mm,
And I remember, I don't know, I had this like just this reality, or this, the curtain was pulled back and I could see clearly for a moment. And it was so true. Like, I don't know how I just saw that. I mean, it's not that like profound of a statement, now that we're in recovery, we see like the dangers of that.
Sure.
Sure. But I was saying, like, at that time where, you're still foggy and all that stuff, I was able to see that clearly. And so I think, like, I've with some sponsees that I work through, I just have one in mind specifically. Like, he got into a relationship, and I'm not saying anything or revealing. This is all just general stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Just got into a relationship early on, and then ended up breaking up with the girl. And it just about, like, we had to work tooth and nail to get him back to where he was healthy.
Yeah.
So as far as threats in early recovery, that's one of the things that I see will take people out the most, is relationships.
Okay, that makes sense. And that comes up a lot. I mean, it really, like, I don't think it surprises me, but that's always one of the main things that comes up when I talk to people about and I think you put it a good way, a threat. What are some of the biggest threats to recovery? And I'll tell you that I was having a conversation with a guy the other day, and one of the things he said that he was just like, his thinking has changed on that a little bit. He thinks maybe some people are ready, some people aren't. I can see both sides of it. I mean, I know that, I think just having been in recovery for a little while, it's like, okay, do I love myself? Am I taking care of myself? Can I have a
Right.
real, honest, healthy, not toxic, crazy, drama filled
Right.
relationship with another person? Am I ready for that? Am I making this person my higher power? Right.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of, like you said, I like that. There's a lot of threats that could come in
Yeah.
in the form of a relationship. So that's a really good point there. And I think that is something to and that's awesome that you saw that as being like something that could take you out.
Right.
Because I think as often as it's suggested, hey, don't get in a relationship, man, we just have that crazy thinking that's like, you know what, I think I can figure this out though.
That's for everybody else, not
Yeah,
me.
yeah, that's it. I will do everything else. Like, don't get into the
Right.
relationship
Right.
stuff. And I mean, some people will even say, like, the big book says that we don't get into people's sex relations. Like, how are you going to tell me? And
Yeah.
I think, kind of like you touched on, and with your coaching, there's other things that probably need to be discussed to make sure that not only someone's staying sober, but they've got a pretty good life too, right? And they're
Yeah.
just moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm just thinking, like, of, like the healthy thing. There's this thing that goes around in recovery, like, don't get into a relationship the first year, that you get sober. And I think that's like a great, I do. Like, I think that's really good. Like,
yeah,
nowhere in the big book does it say that.
sure.
But, I think it's like a generally like a good rule of thumb and a healthy thing to do. Not that I tell, like, the person, that I was, alluding to, I told them, like, I think that's a good idea, but this is, we're going to talk through this. And at the end, it's up to you, where
Mhm.
your convictions truly are. I'm not telling you that you have to wait for a year. I think it would be a good idea, but, at the same time, that's not like the letter of the law, and you have to do this. And with relationships, I don't know this, like, everybody talks about in relationships, like, my better half and this and that. I think people should be two whole pieces coming together.
I like that.
Not like, hey, this person's really happy and I need happiness in my life, so I'm gonna get with this person. Or this person is really financially well off, and I need, some finances added to my life. Just, general examples. And I really feel like that we should set ourselves up. If we're going to look at a long-term relationship, if we do our best to bring our whole healthy self to that, then it just makes sense that the relationship as a whole would be healthier. If we're still dealing with resentment, or still dealing with things in our life that are kind of lingering, then they're going to be brought with us into the relationship. So all I'm saying is do your best to bring your healthiest self into the relationship, deal with all that stuff before, because when you get into a relationship, it's tough because everything is mixed together, and like separating all that stuff becomes super, super difficult.
Yeah.
So, that would be my only suggestion to people is nobody's ever 100% ready to get into a relationship, especially in recovery. We always, we're working on stuff, we're human, and that's in and out of recovery. That's just everybody. Everybody's working on something. But I think there's a point to get to. I think this is super important where I'm okay being with myself. Like I'm comfortable being with myself. I've gotten to a place where I feel like I'm healthy and I'm not just getting into a relationship to cover something up. That's, when I say like the threat in recovery, that's what we do the most is we use things in order to cover up something. So if we still have lingering, fears and stuff like that, we could really subconsciously be using this relationship to cover up some of these things, and it will eventually come out. So again, it's not the letter of the law that you have to wait a year to get into a relationship. I would just leave it up to you and your sponsor or you and your mentor, whatever type of program you're working, and kind of talk through it from that aspect.
Yeah, man, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that we're trying to cover something up. I really like that explanation, and that makes a lot of sense to me. And I've definitely seen a lot of people who, knowing that they probably shouldn't get into a relationship, I think they start to see maybe how codependent they are,
Yeah,
because it's almost like there's a lot of similarities between the drinking and drug use or whatever the addiction was and the relationships.
yeah, so
Like
true.
I was talking to a sponsee the other day, and the conversation was essentially that there were some behaviors going on and kind of, not reaching out to anyone, not letting people know what's going on in terms of going back to this toxic relate, kind of sneaking around. And,
Yeah,
so I think some people realize like, wow, like it's almost like a craving just to not be alone almost. Like
yeah,
I feel like I have to be with somebody. And I think you were just saying like, let's get you to the point where you're cool with being with yourself. And I agree with that 100%. So I want to ask you just kind of on a business note here. So being an online fitness coach myself, I think that some people might be confused about what online coaching is. But, I'll just tell you, like, one of the reasons that I got into online coaching is because I think that everyone could agree, like, that's just kind of where things are going these days,
yeah,
for one. But I also realized that I could make a larger impact. And at the same time, I started to see that I could still get people really great results in terms of getting fit and or working on habits or whatever. So, what has your experience been specifically with coaching online, and how does that actually work with your clients? Do you guys do something similar like we're doing right now, like talking over Zoom, or how does that work?
right. Yeah, it is. So it's just something very similar to this. And what I feel is when people can do it, well, it's two part. One part that you did hit on is like your reach. Like you can do that with anybody, anywhere, and that's absolutely amazing. And you alluded to this part too. It's where stuff is going. We're a convenience-driven consumer society. That's why Amazon is so popular and had its meteoric rise because we want to be in our homes, click a button, and have what we want right then. So it is kind of playing into, I guess that way that we're drifting as a society, not and it's also for me like there's probably people who don't want to go into a doctor's office. That would be more apt to schedule something online with somebody if they had that opportunity, and just to do it that way and feel a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more relaxed. Because like me myself, like I don't like going to the doctor.
Yeah.
Thank God I'm not, like physically, like I don't get sick very much anymore. So that's such an awesome blessing. And like I haven't been to the doctor like my whole recovery. Like I don't think I've ever, like, for like the flu or something like that. Like I don't think I've been to the doctor since then, which is great because I'm not a big fan of doctor. I don't know many people that are fans of going to the doctor. So it's kind of playing on that as well, and having people at ease and comfortable in their own space, their own home, and it's also very convenient for them as well. So it's playing to the client versus making the client jump through any hoops or like come to see you. It's kind of like thinking about them and what would be best to work for you. Like, how can I best meet you on your playing field? How can I best, service you, and how can we make this work? So kind of playing from that mindset.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I get that. I think that number one, there's a convenience factor,
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, like Amazon. Like I want the thing brought to me while I'm in
2 days.
bed.
Gotta be
Bring it to
2 days.
my bedside.
Right. I don't want to get out of bed. Like
Yeah,
deliver it through my window with the drone.
right. Yeah, just fly it in.
Yeah.
So I get that, and I also get that. I think that what we're touching on here is this type of coaching. Can it really? We were talking about barriers in recovery earlier. It really removes another barrier for some people, right? Because
Yeah.
like I've had people come to me that, man, they just now there are people that don't feel comfortable in gyms, and there are people that kind of like you with the doctor's office, like they just hate gyms. And
Yeah.
so they're like, "Hey, I want to do something from home. Can you help me figure that out?" So I think that anything, especially in a recovery sense, that helps kind of, I'll just use the term, plant that seed a little bit
Yeah.
easier, then that's really awesome. So let me ask you this: so through the coaching, and maybe even through writing the book, how has this shaped or helped your own recovery?
Yeah. It's a lot because I think what I see in myself is when I'm taking that step out to advance my recovery a little bit more, it usually brings like another level of accountability to where I am. Because you can kind of sit in the shadows of recovery and just, and I've done that before where I when I was going through recovery before, I only told my family, like literally that was all the people that knew that I was in recovery was my family.
Okay.
And I found that like nobody else knew. So it was easy for me to kind of like sneak out and go to the bar, sneak out and go find a drug dealer, and nobody knew the better. So it's brought a different level of accountability to where like now if I went out somewhere, just because like I'm open about it, like I was talking about, um, with people at church, with people at my job. If I went out, with people at my job, like we had a function the other day, like a Christmas party type thing, and everybody was drinking. It was basically like a booze exchange. It was like a dirty Santa. Of course, like I'm the one that brings like a humidifier or like an essential oil diffuser. And
There may or
everybody,
may not be a big book in there.
right, exactly. While I'm telling them, well, you could be an alcoholic if.
Right. Yeah.
It was pretty funny. Like I talked to my boss about that, and I can joke about it. But in situations like that, like if I were to like pick up a drink, they would be like, "Dude, what are you doing?" Like, whereas before, if I didn't have that, or when I didn't do that, I could have done that, and nobody would have thought anything. Nobody would have said anything. So that's just like a small example of like a different level of accountability, just generally speaking about being open or writing a book or doing, recovery coaching. That's super helpful and beneficial to my recovery. It's also helps me to push and advance. Like, how this is, when you start sponsoring individuals and stuff like that, it becomes more than me. Like if I were to do something, if I were to go back out, it's not just me anymore. Like I'll go back out and it'll hurt my family. Like there's a lot of people that would affect. That they're looking for you to be there for them, to encourage them, and
Yeah.
And so it just brings like a whole different element of like, hey, if I do this, like I'm not only hurting myself, but there's like a lot of other people that I could be hurting too. So looking at it from that, when I'm talking about accountability, like it's from that aspect too. Like there's people that are looking to you to be there and help them in their recovery or their life, that you would be hurting as well. So that's like another thing that I think about too.
Man, that's a really great point. Yeah, and it does add a couple layers of accountability. And I'll tell you that for me, um, it it adds a layer of accountability in the sense that I want to be the coach, and I mainly work with people in recovery. So this works on a few, different levels for me. Like I want to be the coach that's taking my own advice too.
Yes.
Like I don't want to just be like up here like preaching, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. And then I'm just not doing any of that stuff. I think
Right.
that's I think that doesn't look great, but also it doesn't feel great. Like you want to feel like I think it's a good way to uh connect with people. But yeah, I mean, you're right, man. And maybe I haven't thought about that much that, when you're putting your recovery out there kind of on another level, it's not that you're thinking like, oh, I can't relapse because of these people, but that is in the back of your mind that like, man, this would affect this would have a pretty wide impact. Like if,
Yeah.
if something did happen. And so I think, the more reasons to stay sober in my mind and keep doing this deal and keep growing really, the better.
Yeah.
So that's a really awesome point. So man, it's been great talking to you here, Jacob. And
Yeah.
before we wrap up, I want to ask you, what's one piece of advice that you'd like to share with the sober nation?
Well, again, with the good questions, it's like encapsulate something. um, so one piece of advice that I would say, I'll just this just popped on mind, so I'm going to say it.
Sure.
Resentments. If you're dealing with resentments, um, do your best to go to your sponsor or go to whoever you have in your corner and deal with those resentments. Resentments will be the biggest governor or uh, biggest ceiling to you advancing to your next level in your recovery. Your next level just in life in general is one thing that would be like literally like a cloud that will block you off from the sunshine that you're meant to experience. So if you start to lay these resentments down, start to work through these resentments, then your life will take another step. It will advance in your recovery. So I don't know why
Man.
that popped to my mind, but it's just something that I've dealt with in the past. Man, resentments are like super heavy. They're super powerful, and I see the breakthrough when I deal with those. So if you're out there and dealing with the resentment, thought encourage you to kind of turn into that and deal with it, and man, your life will be so much better because of it.
Wow, bringing that on the spot fire right there to wrap us up. That was good, man. I really like that. Yeah, because it's talked about quite a bit in recovery that can be a catalyst for relapse. But at the same time, I
Yeah.
really like how you just said that it can also be that ceiling, not just in your recovery, but in your life that's preventing you from growing. And man, I think that's a really awesome point. So we're gonna end it right there, man, because I don't think it's gonna get any better than that. So Jacob, I appreciate you coming on the show today with me, man.
Jonathan, thanks so much, man. I really enjoyed it, dude. And thanks for all you do, putting this out to Sober Nation, man. Keep on doing it because I know tons of people are benefiting from it, man. So I really appreciate it.
I think they will, and I'll think they'll benefit from everything that you shared today, too. So you can learn more about Jacob and his online recovery coaching at thesustainedlife.com. You can find Jacob's book, Recovered, on Amazon. Nation, thanks for joining me, and I'll talk to you soon. Be sure to check out the show notes for all the info from today's episode. Sober Nation FM is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Sobriety Engine is a free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. This show is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle while supporting your sobriety, you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And again, whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. Nation, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.